This week I wanted to learn how to draw animals, objects, houses, characters, and more, with basically no experience. So I bought pencils and sketchbooks. My plan was simple, going from being bad at drawing to being able to draw basically anything I wanted in 7 days. Drawing was actually my biggest passion when I was a kid, but no matter what, I've never been able to get good at it. So about 15 years ago, I decided to quit. Until a week ago, I found this picture, and I decided to try learning how to draw one more time. To keep track of the progress, I drew two completely different subjects that I always wanted to create. A cartoon version of myself and a hyper-realistic eye, with a plan of drawing them again a week from that moment and see if there was gonna be any difference. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and classes, and I made a list of things I needed to learn to get better at drawing. And I started from the basics, drawing shapes. Being able to draw squares, rectangles, circles, and ellipses is extremely important, because it allows you to break down complex objects into multiple shapes, making it so much easier to visualize and draw nearly anything you want. The secret is to keep your wrist steady and move the entire arm. And after practicing over and over, simply drawing shapes or lines for 1 hour, I finally saw a good progress. So I started going around finding random things to break down into simple shapes, but I could only see vases. So I started from there, simplifying them into ovals or rectangles. At first, I was extremely bad, and slowly, I started to get better at it, always building the base of the drawing with different shapes, constantly modifying them until I had something similar to the picture. And finally, I added bold lines, and I was honestly surprised with the result.
This is insane!
I wasn't expecting such an improvement in the first of 4 steps, so I was excited to move to the next one. Learning to see like an artist by understanding proportions. I knew how to draw shapes and lines, but now I had to learn how to place these elements in relation to each other consistently.
What is this?
The technique consists in creating an imaginary frame around objects. If I take this camera for example, this is going to be its frame. We can then divide the frame into smaller segments. These construction lines are extremely useful to get the proportions right. In the beginning, I was still pretty far off. But after drawing basically every single thing I found in my house, using a hard pencil for the construction lines and a softer pencil for the final lines, I started to get the proportions right almost every single time, and I was having a ton of fun. But before trying the cartoon character and the realistic eye, I still had 2 things to improve, and one of them was perspective. Perspective allows you to draw 3-dimensional subjects in a realistic way. To create perspective in a drawing, we need 3 elements. The first one is called horizon line, and it represents the eye level of our viewpoint. Now, imagine if the box was infinitely long, we would be able to see it only before it meets the horizon line. And that's the vanishing point. And these are the perspective lines, which connect the front plane of the object with the vanishing point, wherever it is. These lines allow you to draw the sides and the back of the object. If you repeat the process by adding 2 vanishing points, you get the most common type of perspective in drawings, in which an edge of this object is the closest point to the viewer. We constantly see the world in perspective, and that's why this technique is so important to make your drawing look right. As a challenge, I decided to draw an entire house in perspective, following basically my imagination. I started with the construction lines, and when the final shape was ready, I went over the main lines with a marker. Then I added the details of the windows, repeating the same exact process of the walls. After 2 hours, I erased the construction lines, and since the house was still looking pretty flat, I attempted to add a few shadows, literally copying images on Google. But after more than 3 hours of work,
Yes!
it turned out like this, and I was honestly really happy with the results. Next! As you saw, shadows have the power to add realism and depth to the drawings. And that's why shading is the last step of my list before attempting the 2 first drawings one more time. I learned that if you have a squared object like a box,
Literally the first try.
each side of the box will have a different shading, depending on where the light comes from. Instead, if you have a rounded object, you'll need to blend the shadows and the highlights. It took me a little bit of practice because at first I really couldn't do it. But then I tried with a sphere. And I understood it's all about slowly decreasing the pressure on the sheet, going from shadows to highlights and using a piece of paper to make the blending effect even more realistic. And now, finally, it was time to try again the 2 drawings I made in the beginning, and I decided to start from the character. I took some inspiration online and I started building the construction lines, drawing the frame to understand the right proportions. After that, I started sketching the shape and the major details of the character. This step took me a bunch of time, drawing and erasing stuff, trying to put down a bunch of ideas I had in my head.
Hands are insanely hard.
Alright, it's been 5 hours, I still need to add the shoes, and you probably can't see anything. I still need to add the shoes and a weapon. Let's do it. It took me more than 30 minutes to add the shoes, and then I drew the weapon. And with that, the construction lines were finished. So it was time to trace the main lines with a black marker. This step is insanely satisfying, but if you make a mistake, there's no coming back, so I had to be extremely careful. Slowly, my character was coming alive, and after 6 hours in total, at 3 AM, I finished the best drawing of my life. I didn't have the proper colors, so I decided to leave it like that. Let me get the colors and then I'll publish the final results on my Instagram. And this is the insane difference compared to the character I made in the beginning. So it was time for the final drawing. The eye. And I was curious if with all the new methods I was gonna be able to draw a realistic one. I watched this tutorial probably 4 times and then I started. I built the construction lines, which consists in a circle and a slightly inclined line close to its center. This allowed me to draw the shape of the eye. Then, after erasing all the construction lines, it's time to add some details, such as the pupil. This eye was already looking much more natural than the first one I drew. But to create a realistic eye, there is still a lot of stuff to do. I drew a small highlight area in the iris, the pupil, and the iris itself, but at first I simply filled it with a shade of grey. Before creating the details in the iris, I added some shadows, applying the same technique I used before for the sphere. Only at this point I tried to draw the iris, but I'm not gonna lie, I found this step insanely difficult. The first attempt was pretty terrible, so I decided to start again from zero. Alright. This time I knew exactly what to do, and so it took me way less than before to draw the base of the eye. And then I spent 1 hour only to complete the iris, but in the end, this time, I was pretty happy with the results. It took me hours, but I'm pretty proud of this iris. Now I had to draw and then shade the different parts of the eye and the skin. This process is the one that took me the most time to complete, but I learned that patience while drawing is key. And as a last touch, I used a tissue to smoothen the shades. The eye at this point was looking pretty good, but I still needed one more fundamental detail: the eyelashes. The key is to draw them in random direction and length to make them look as natural as possible, and it's easier said than done. Drawing is an actual skill, and as for every other skill, talent is overrated. Practice is not. And after about 8 hours in total, the eye was finished, and I was insanely proud of how much better it was compared to the first one I drew 7 days before. Subscribe and click the bell for more skills and content like this. And follow me on Instagram, I'm really active there and I post skills I don't share on YouTube.